All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to FCI Live and welcome to today's session, The Other Side of Grants. My name is Faye Mack. I am the Executive Director of Food Co-op Initiative, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today. And today we are joined by four panelists, various board members from four different startups across the country: Chicago Market, Prairie Food Co-op, and SunCoast Market and Bethlehem Co-op Market. And I'll let them all introduce themselves in just a moment. But I just want to say to you four, we're really grateful to have your expertise today. And before we get started, I also want to just acknowledge some of our sponsors. So we are really proud at FCI to offer stipends to many of our speakers. And this puts in event takes a lot of staff time. So we're really grateful for our sponsors who help make this program possible. We have three champion sponsors this year: National Co-op Grocers, Dot Co-op, and Colluminate, and I encourage you all to check them out if you don't know them already. So thank you to them for their sponsorship of this event. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And turn us over into a conversation. So first off, I'm hoping to just start out by asking you all to introduce yourselves really briefly and share your role, your co-op, and maybe a stat or two about where you are in the development process. And Leslie, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to ask you to get started.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. I am the current board president of Prairie Food Co-op, and we are in the final phase. Our store is built, shelves are up, and we are just doing our last final capital campaign before we open our doors, hopefully in the next 2 to 4 months, give or take.
Great, thanks, Leslie. Domenic, you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Domenic Breininger. I'm the board chair of the Bethlehem Co-op Market in Eastern Pennsylvania. And we're in a similar place. We're hoping to open our store sometime in late summer. We're just waiting for some last lead time delivery dates from some of our large equipment. And we are hoping to, get the store open in that time frame. And we too are embarking on a final fundraising push at the moment.
Great, thanks. Grant, how about you go next and then Kim?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Grant Kessler, board president at Chicago Market on the north side of town here in Chicago. And our position is that we're poised to start construction. We've secured our building. It's that fabulous historic building behind me. Super cool space. We're excited to be there. We have encountered rising costs, and so we are working to close a funding gap right now so that we can close with our bank and get the construction started. So we're working on that at the moment.
Okay, and I guess I'm last. So hi, everyone. It's good to see you. My name is Keri Frink, and I am the board president of SunCoast Market Co-op. And we're in Imperial Beach, which is a small border city in the southwest corner of San Diego County. And we are under construction. We've purchased most of our equipment, and we are furiously fundraising the last funds needed and hope to open by late summer, early fall.
Great. Thank you all. And so as you can tell, these are some late stage startup co-ops who are getting close to opening and who have been doing a lot of fundraising for a long time. And so we asked them here because there's been growing use of grants as co-ops are developing. It's become a really important and necessary piece of pretty much all startups' capital stacks. And they're really powerful sources of funding that can come from outside your ownership base that don't have to be paid back. And so they're a wonderful source of funding. And even after navigating application processes and being awarded the grant, most grants take effort to access, to spend the money, to manage, and to report on. And so we wanted to take some time today to hear from these different startups about that part of the experience. So after the award comes in, what happens next? And how do you go about managing the grant? And what are some lessons learned? And so our goal here is to have you leave knowing that grants are worth it, but they're work. And we want you to enter into that with your eyes wide open, so that you can set yourself up for success. Another note too, just to share as some framing before we get into questions, is that there are a lot of different kinds of grants. So there are federal grants or other sources of government grants. We'll definitely spend some time talking about those today. There are private grants too from different foundations or other businesses and sources of philanthropy. Some grants are restricted in that you can only use them for certain activities and expenses that you've already mentioned, in your application process. And some are unrestricted, where they're really just cash for you to spend as you need to spend it. Grants are sometimes time sensitive. Sometimes they operate on reimbursement. So you spend the money actually before you get the money, which we'll talk about today, and others provide money up front. And they all have different requirements around reporting, which is really important to stay in good relationship with the funders, and also to make sure that you don't have to give any money back. So we'll be touching on a lot of those different aspects today. And if anyone has any questions about kind of specifics around what kind of grant folks are talking about, feel free to throw that in the chat too. So let's go ahead and get started. So we want to start by first talking about federal grants. They're one of the huge sources of funding for startups, and one of the sources of one of the grants where you can get the largest source of money. So, some grants will be $1,000, $2,000. Federal grants are many thousands of dollars, up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so they are large sources of grant funding, which also come with large amounts of regulation and reporting. And so I want to talk a little bit about that a bit. And Domenic, I'm going to start with you and ask you to share a little bit about Bethlehem's experience with federal grants.
Yeah, I'd love to. So we were the recipient of a fairly large federal grant at $2.9 million. Our House Representative, Susan Wild at the time, was a large advocate for a number of community investment projects that were going on in the north side of Bethlehem, and we were one of the cornerstone projects of that area. So as she was working through, Congress budget, House Appropriations Committee, she earmarked a grant for us. She actually offered for community projects to apply. She encouraged us to apply and put in the full funding of our store, which back in 2021 was 2.9, and now it's quite a bit more, which we can talk about. I'm sure we all have stories there we can talk about. So we ended up winning the grant in 2021, and we celebrated quite a bit. And then we learned about some of the details, right? So first off, we were incorporated as a nonprofit co-op. In order to make the fullest use of our grant, we had to change our incorporation to a for-profit business because of some of the restrictions that Housing and Urban Development put on how the money could be used. So HUD was the government agency, or is the government agency, that oversees large community investment grants. And the first thing we had to do is negotiate a contract with HUD as to how we could spend the money, the 2.9. And one of the restrictions was on how you're incorporated, and we had to change our incorporation status to a for-profit, which had some effects on the other side of the way we raise money. But, we felt because it was a $2.9 million grant that it made sense because it was going to fund our store. It then took us 2 years to negotiate the contract with HUD. So we didn't touch any of the money for 2 years. There was a lot of back and forth. In order to receive the money, we had to go through a official administrator of HUD funding, which was the city of Bethlehem. So we were talking to the city's talking to HUD and HUD's lawyers. And then, it's kind of like back and forth through the three parties at that point. It ultimately is a reimbursement grant. So while we had $2.9 million, we had to be able to make the purchases before, we can get the reimbursement. That in itself was complicated, so we ended up hiring a consultant who has experience with HUD grants, and she helped us navigate, the way that we had to put together the budget for HUD and the way that we can do the spend down, the way that we respond to audit requests and audit reports. And then we ended up needing to seek out traditional bank financing because we didn't have the cash up front to make the payments to get the reimbursement. So a lot of logistics in those first 2 years. The delay, we thought essentially we would be able to access the money almost immediately. Because it took 2 years, it added a 2-year project delay to the store opening, among other reasons, but that was a source of it. And so as we got the grant, we were communicating a tentative opening date, which we wildly missed because of not understanding what it took to, get a contract in place with HUD, and also, what it meant to have a reimbursement based grant. So I guess I'll stop there and allow Leslie to give her perspective.
Yeah, thanks. So like Domenic kind of reported with Bethlehem, we went through a similar process. We worked with our Congressperson Sean Casten to receive a $750,000 award. Was through HUD. I believe it was through an appropriations process, but it was effectively, though, managed, the contract is managed as a reimbursable grant. So just like Bethlehem, we could not receive that money up front. We had to spend that money first and then get the reimbursement back. Unlike this particular grant, though, our grant was only available through a non-for-profit. And so alternatively, what we did, we worked with CDS as a fiscal agent, and they were great partners with us, albeit this was kind of their first pass at doing something in this scale as well. So we learned together, maybe a positive experience, maybe a challenging one. I think we would both agree it was a little bit of both, but they were effectively our partners in that. So the way that the grant was written was that CDS was also a recipient of those funds and then acted on our behalf as a fiscal agent. I won't go into details about all that. Somebody can, if anybody has questions, we can certainly talk offline about how we worked with that. But was another layer of way in which the funds had to pass through to receive those funds. So just something to think about when you are applying for grant, knowing who needs to receive that grant and what those requirements are. Another thing that we ran into was, as a HUD grant, we had to conduct what was called an environmental review. So a lot of us are going to be talking about the different hoops that you have to jump through. This was a doozy. It was definitely in that realm of bureaucratic craziness. And I mean, we had to work with our village very closely, and it took weeks to get answers. There were questions that were about toxic substance testing and storage of flammable containers near our site, and way over our head and level of expertise. And even at the village's level too, was something different that they learned about as well. So those were kind of our experiences on the federal grant side of things.
Thank you both so much. So I'm blown away by the complexity of major federal grants, especially in the HUD realm where I have less access and or less experience. So it just sounds like it takes a lot to get and manage that grant. Domenic, I heard you say that you had to hire a consultant to help you navigate the administration of the grant.
Yeah,
so
we did the same. Yeah,
you did the
we did the
same.
same on our
So
state grant
that's
too.
definitely, something to consider, right? In the capacity and the complexity that it takes. And I think, Leslie, was your grant also a reimbursement based grant?
It was, yes.
Yeah.
So we attributed it all to construction costs because we knew that those were the furthest out. But it also meant we had to come up with those funds to pay our contractors ahead of time too. So
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's you know, a big piece to think about with federal grants, and federal grants are often reimbursement grants. FCI receives a federal grant that is a reimbursement-based grant as well. And so considering that, we'll talk a little bit more about project timing and flow and how that kind of accessing that funds can do that. And while we're on the federal note, I do want to just acknowledge that right now we are in a period of uncertainty around federal funds, and kind of the highest level of uncertainty around if grants that have been already awarded will be, will receive the money that they were given. So it is an area where I think that federal grants have always felt very stable. That may not be the case right now. So I don't know if Domenic or Leslee or anybody else have experienced any of that so far this year. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I did just want to acknowledge that that's a space that we're in right now.
Yeah, we certainly felt the impact of, the temporary pause or whatever it ended up being in HUD grants back in January. So that put a lot of uncertainty on our grant. After the pause was lifted, we still at first didn't see the money flowing, so we weren't sure what was going on. After that, the administration of our grant was moved to like a local HUD agency who wasn't familiar with our grant. So at first it created slowness in reimbursement. We're now seeing the funds flow, and we're actually accelerating reimbursement submissions just to try to get it spent as fast as possible because we're not quite sure what's next.
Thankfully, we closed our grant right before all of that occurred. So we were very thankful for that.
Great. And one last quick question, and I'm going to move us on. Cassie in the chat asked Domenic if your grant was a federal grant from HUD or an appropriations earmark.
It was a federal grant that came through the appropriations committee. So I don't know if I don't know if I know enough to answer specifically. What I do know is that a representative Wild solicited for grants that then she worked to get in the budget for her district. The appropriations committee granted the grant to Susan Wild through the budgeting process, and then gave it to HUD for administration. That's what I understand. I don't know that I'm answering the question, so sorry.
That's perfect. And Cassie, if you have if you want to dive into your question a little bit more, we can come back to it in the Q&A, but thanks for asking that. So federal grants, right? Source of huge amounts of money, and also, as we're learning, large amount of administration and bureaucracy. And so I want to shift us a little bit to hear a little bit about other kinds of grants. And in particular, Kim, SunCoast has been just incredibly masterful in accessing lots of different grants and different kinds of funding. And so you've had experience in managing multiple grants at one time. And I'm hoping you could share a little bit about what that's like and your experience there.
Sure. So we decided to put a strong emphasis on grants and donations in our capital stack because of our community demographics, San Diego's strong cultural philanthropy, and because we had people on our board that had experience with grant writing and nonprofit fundraising. And so we've, since 2020, we've received 16 grants ranging anywhere from $4,000 to $500,000. So we haven't got a multi-million-dollar one yet, but we're still trying. And we've had as many as, say, 5 to 6 grants to manage at one time. So we really had to be on top of our grants. And it's really important to stay on top of all the deadlines. There's, can be reporting deadlines, deadlines for spending the money. Some grants have very limited, requirements. Maybe there's no report, or there's just a report at the end, and then others might, require quarterly reports. I think that's the biggest frequency that we've had. So it's really important to stay on top of your tracking and documenting your expenditures, your activities. Our treasurer does a fantastic job, and she and I meet regularly to look at our expenditures, and we're sure we're meeting all of our requirements. I think it's really important to especially pay attention to when the money needs to be spent by, Because if you don't spend it by the deadline, you're at risk of losing that money or having it taken away if it's already in your bank. So I think it's really important to communicate with your funders about delays, you know, and there's inevitably going to be delays of some kind. Our funders have been really flexible about providing extensions when we've needed them, with providing amendments to our grants. So sometimes, you know, you may think that you're going to need the money for one thing, but things change and, you know, we'd really like to use the money in another way. So we've had to do multiple amendments, multiple extensions. And so I think those are just things to be prepared for and not be afraid to ask for when your grants, if it looks like you can't spend the money in time or you need to make some changes.
Great. And Grant, you all have had some experience with some smaller grants as well. Is there anything you'd add there?
Yes, we did have one moderate sized grant of $75,000 that we were able to apply for kind of just after COVID. It was the Chicago Region Food System Fund, which is a group of family foundation funds working together. And at the time, they've done multiple rounds, and the round that worked the best for us was one where their goal was to respond to what happened in COVID and address resilience in the local food system. And so we were kind of a shoe-in on that grant writing. It was, you know, easy to write for their goals. We were very well aligned, and it worked. We did receive the grant, and it was wonderful. It was years ago. It was 2021, I think, and was able to help us a lot with our development needs at the time. Being in the state of Illinois, we are kind of, as we were talking about earlier, we are by default a for-profit business. And so we also use CDS fund as a fiscal agent to sort of apply for this grant, and then the funds went through them. They're wonderful, and it's terrific to have that opportunity. But I would note that what that means for you all, if you use a fiscal agent, is that they take a percentage, right? There's a cost for that. So it costs money to raise money, which is common with a lot of these grants. I mean, you hear people saying they have to hire an administrator. It costs them some funds. And I can tell you about another cost when we talk about our other grant. But so I will say about that grant, it was super lightweight to apply for. It was very lightweight to meet their needs and to report afterwards. The reporting was not onerous at all. So it was a great one for us. It was a win. So.
Oh, I love that. That's great to hear.
Yes. Some are challenging. That one was nice. One. Yes, right. Kudos to that granting agents group to, you know, be helpful without being onerous. I think that's awesome.
And Kim, you sort of alluded to communicating with funders when there are delays and changes. And I think that I have not heard of a startup yet that has not hit a delay on something and has not had some changes in their plans. So let's talk about that a little bit. How does that work? You know, I know, you know, if you have member loans or owner loans or other sources of funding, you're communicating with your owners all the time about, you know, timelines and all of that. I'm curious if folks can talk a little bit about how they navigate that with grants. Leslee, do you want to kick off by sharing a little bit?
Yeah, sure. This, like everyone, really put a kink in our plan going forward, and really because of grant delays, our project was delayed almost 2 years. And so the federal grant actually came through pretty well as far as the agreement timeframe and everything went, but our state grant took about 18 months or more to actually finalize. So as a result, what ended up happening was we applied for these grants with a lot of assumptions about our construction expenses and what we were going to be spending on money on when. We wrote them assuming we would get the state grant before the federal, because that was approved 6 months before the federal grant. So our logic was sound in terms of that time frame, but the Fed grant came first. So we had to reshuffle a lot of our expenses in our budget so that we could start getting those reimbursements back for those funds, which we use then to pay incurring bills coming up. So just an example of how kind of silly that ended up impacting us was one of our budget line items was polished concrete flooring. And we ended up 2.5 years later, when it actually came time to install our flooring, say, we'd really like to upgrade that. Like, we have the money to do it, and it's just going to give us a better look. Well, we had to rewrite our budget and submit a budget change so that the invoice that had our upgraded flooring on it could be aligned with that budget line item to get the reimbursement for. So definitely write your budgets and your plan as broadly as possible. Flooring, that works. Flooring is applicable to everything. So sometimes you can't be that specific, can't be that broad, but just kind of think about that when you are writing those applications and those budgets. Yeah.
Yeah, broad. Don't talk
Yeah.
about the polished floor, as excited as you are about it.
I know. And then another thing that also kind of compromised that is because our project was delayed, the state also was delayed in giving us our reimbursement back. So we would submit our monthly reports, and sometimes it would take 6-8 weeks, especially in the beginning, to get that money back to us, which meant that we had to go back to our vendors and say, we're sorry, we don't have money to pay this next invoice. So what really helped us with that, it's never easy to deliver that news, especially if they have to continue to doing work for you. But we made sure that we had great relationships with all of our construction vendors in advance. And it, just having that relationship might have helped soften the news. It didn't change the fact that we didn't have money, but it did at least not ruin the relationship because I was already kind of built on some solid ground. So it's another, tip to think about too. You will be late on payments. It's just going to happen, especially because you're waiting for reimbursements that you have no control over when they come back into your bank account. Yeah.
That's good to consider. Lots of communication. I will not surprise a room full of cooperators that it comes down to relationships, right? And communicating with all of your different partners.
Yeah. And so to kind of combat that, we had to go to our owners for short-term bridge loans, which was great. Our owners stepped up. We got $500,000 from them in short-term bridge loans. But then that compounded our ability to get long-term or other loans from Leaf and Shared Capital. They had some concerns that their loans would not be paid off before those others. So those again were relationship conversations. Those were good conversations to have with those folks, and they did work with us, but it was a sticking point, and it was kind of problematic there at the beginning, and could have definitely compromised our ability to get some loans. So just think about that. If you do have to take those short-term loans for an immediate need, what the longer impact might be on that. We kind of learned that lesson as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit toward the end about how your grants kind of line up with other sources of funding too. So let's definitely come back to that a bit. Grant, you all had a big TIF fund. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, compared to our other grant, which was lovely at the time, the big one for us was the $5.8 million in funding from the city, which first came to us as part of they called it the Chicago Recovery Plan grant funding. They had a round of grant funding with federal funds that they were passing out, and we were chosen. And then they made the decision, having done that, to disperse funds to us through TIF instead of through this pool of recovery funds. They wanted to spend that money on the south and west side, and we sit in a TIF district that has a lot of money. So they said, where there are funds, we're going to disperse them through TIF. We were still happy to have $5.8 million, and it was a game changer for the project. But it comes with all kinds of difficulties. It sounds a lot like these federal grants that you all were talking about. We had to spend time working up what's called an RDA, a redevelopment agreement with the city, and it had to go to city council, get approved, and all that sort of thing. We were super fortunate to have on our team, a board member, and then he stepped off and he's still a volunteer who used to run the TIF program for the city. So he helped us write all this and work through the RDA agreement. We didn't have to hire a consultant because we had a sort of basically had a volunteer consultant working through that with us. But it was a layer of complication. We will have to prove up TIF eligible expenses. So there will be reporting in the process later of showing, hey, these are the things we've spent on, kind of like your concrete floor. These are the things we put in our RDA, and now we're asking for reimbursement on them. So the TIF is a reimbursement grant as well. And for us, what that means is that we have to borrow that money. So we've got, expensive or high bridge loans, short term, to cover. So it's, again, that whole cost of being granted money is that it doesn't come free. We have these expenses alongside of it, the interest and things on a bridge loan. So we'll have the bridge loan. The RDA also requires certain percentages of women and minority business owned contractors in the pool, which we love, of course, as a co-op. We're happy to have that, but it's a certain percentage, and we have our general contractor has to meet those percentages for us. And so we have to work with somebody who knows how to do that and can do that kind of reporting. And so that's another part of it all. And the last thing, which is kicking us right now, is it turned out that our TIF district is going to close at the end of this year. So various delays along the way for us have meant that we are now butted up against the possibility of losing the TIF entirely, or not being able to spend it all if we can't get our construction started and burn through that money before the end of the year. So it sounded great at first, and it has been challenging over time. Good news, bad news story for us. So we'll see where it goes next.
Yeah. So there's a lot here around both how you write the grant and then how to manage it throughout the years as delays come up or changes in your instance grant. And Tamika, you had a question around suggestions on how to, I think what I'm hoping you could unmute and ask your question, because I'm not sure I'm totally understanding. I think you're asking if there are ways to write in other kinds of expenses that aren't subject to delays. Is that your question?
Thank you. That was said poorly. I'm asking about things that we don't consider. Like I heard a lot about including professional services, for example, for somebody to maybe manage the grant that you made. You didn't think about that at first. Or I did appreciate what Leslie said about making making it broad where possible. So instead of specifying a type of flooring, just include flooring. But things like that to help that we may not consider that can help avoid delays or costs that you just didn't think through.
Okay.
If there are any suggestions towards those types of things that, sometimes just come up out of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add in our experience, it depends sort of on what the grant limitations are as far as what are eligible reimbursable expenses to. So some of them define very specific, we will reimburse you for technology, or it's a little bit more broad. So it does really depend on which grant you're applying for to be able to say what types of funds or allocations you're trying to choose there. We opted to use construction funds because we knew those were our greatest lump expenses. HVAC was this big bucket. So reimbursement wise, that was really easy for us because we knew if HVAC was going to cost $350,000, we could account for $350,000 in a very simple invoicing reimbursement request that way, rather than try to like nickel and dime all of these different expenses, which makes reporting really hard too.
Yeah, well, I'll add a little bit as well. Agree completely with what Leslie said. Two things I would think about is making your budget categories as broad as possible and letting the agency tell you it's too broad, right? So let them rein you in to give you the most flexibility. And then second, think about where your risk of cost escalation exists the most and over account for it. So, we were coming out of pandemic. If I were to redo our budget submission, I would think about the fact that we were seeing trends in equipment and supply chain issues, which was giving upward cost pressure on large equipment items. What we really could have done is made that construction equipment budget larger than we had estimates for at the moment, anticipating the cost escalation. So those are the two things I'd add.
And I'll just add one thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Okay,
go for it.
Okay, just really quickly, I would say, you know, with like a foundation grant, for example, you have one shot typically to, you know, put your application in and tell them, you know, make your case for, you know, why they should fund this program, how it aligns with their values and their goals and their requirements. So it's really a fine dance, fine line that you're walking between giving enough information so that, you know, you can show that you are, you know, you're the perfect, you know, applicant for this funding that they have, but also not being too specific that, you know, you rein yourself in. So it really kind of depends, like I think Leslie was saying, you know, on the grant application requirements itself and what you think. And occasionally you might even, if there's somebody who's been funded by that funder before, you might be able to get them to share their grant application with you. I have asked that on occasion from folks just to get a sense of what you know, people have written that has gotten funded in the past.
Now, Kim, I'm hoping to just stick with you for a second and come back to that relationship building a little bit, because I know that SunCoast has done a lot around building and maintaining relationships with funders, which is a little bit easier for non-federal grants. Sometimes you never meet or talk to anybody with your federal grant, though there are other people related who you can build relationships with. But can you talk a little bit about how you approach that part?
Yeah. So, you know, building relationships has been something that, you know, I think all co-ops work on, is something that we've been really strategic about and have really focused on from the very beginning. SunCoast is at a lot of our community events. You know, we are part of a lot of coalitions, Chamber of Commerce, you know, various organizations, building relationships with various folks, because you never know who might be that person who could connect you to some funding that maybe you weren't aware of. We, you know, have scheduled meetings with our elected officials over time. It's a little easier for us because we're in a small city, so everybody kind of knows each other. So sometimes it can be harder if you're in a bigger city, but also scheduling meeting with community leaders and asking for, you know, introductions. You know, hey, we've, you know, shared with you, you know, what our status is. Can you think of anybody that, you know, might be able to help us that maybe we should talk to? Could you make an introduction through an email? Because it's much easier than trying to, you know, like cold call somebody who has no idea who you are. So all of that has been really, really important for us. We had a member, owner of our co-op, who I was talking to her about our needs and, you know, all this, and she actually had worked for a foundation in another state, and she happened to have a contact with a local San Diego foundation. So she said, well, you know, I'll reach out to them and just see if they have any ideas for you. And suddenly I got this email that had a code and an invitation to apply for a grant that wasn't advertised anywhere. It was a family, you know, fund. Donor advised funds, they're often called in foundations, so that it's a family fund, and they don't advertise how to apply for their funding. And yeah, so that was great. We got $100,000 grant that way. So yeah, I think it's, you know, getting the word out there, talking to a lot of people about what you need. And then we also, you know, try to keep those relationships up. So when something happens, if, you know, one of us is doing a news interview, we get an article in a newspaper, you know, we send it out to our funders, you know, share with them what we're doing, kind of keep them updated. And also, you know, thanking, of course, the funders is always important too, to make sure that they know that we really appreciate their support.
Yeah, so that's a lot of work. I want to acknowledge that everything you just said takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it's similar to working with your owners, right? You want to stay engaged and keep them engaged throughout. So all of those great organizing skills you build in communicating with your community and with your owners go for funders as well. People want to feel connected, right? And involved. Right. And that's true at the federal level too, right? So Domenic, I'm wondering, you know, you probably aren't inviting random HUD employees to come see store visits, but how do you build relationships for federal grants?
Yeah, so first off, we would hold monthly meetings with the city who's administering our grant. And this is really a, technical, tactical meeting. Every submission, you'd be surprised, comes with questions. And so we'd have some back and forth on how to answer HUD questions. We also use it as an opportunity to update the city on the project so that our messages to the media and others in the community were aligned, particularly since we're in a neighborhood improvement zone as part of the city. So yeah, we were with the mayor's office for the last few years, every single month, and that continues to this day. The other thing to think about is, especially with federal grants, how does your federal representatives think about the grant, and how do they like to talk about it in public? So it's interesting. One of the things we learned early on is, we would make sure we would say things like, oh, Congressperson Wild, help us get this grant. We're so thankful, blah, blah, blah. And of course we were. What we didn't realize is that our senator was helping in the background from the Senate side. And, we got a very kind, gentle reminder from our senator at one point that said, hey, I helped with this too. And so from that point over, it's like, okay, yeah, Congressperson Wild, Senator Casey, they both helped us in the process. So it's little things, in the grand scheme of things, like things like that, understanding how, your stakeholders and sponsors with the grant want to talk about the grant in public so that you're aligned and, support, to the extent appropriate, their political causes as well. So yeah, meeting with them and making sure you understand where their heads are at with what they've done for you.
Great. That's great. Thanks. So I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A with others. So what I wanted to make sure we had a little bit of time to talk about was about how grants interplay with other sources of funding. So for the most part, startup co-ops are not raising all of their funds through grants. And you're also needing loans and funding from owners and other different aspects of funding. And so when we had our planning call, it was really interesting to hear some of you reflect about how those interplay and some lessons you've learned around that. So I'm hoping we can share a little bit about that so folks can be thinking about the entire capital stack. And as these startups you all are kind of in the late stages of development. So you're looking at those final pushes of funding, right, to get to your opening day. And so Kim, I'm wondering if we can start with you and just sharing a little bit about your experience in accessing lending too.
Sure, sure. Well, one thing we came across recently was that, most of our grants have been from local sources, not federal, and foundations, and we view that as community investment. Um, but it didn't occur to us that we not having owner loans and preferred shares, because we're not doing owner loans, we're not doing owner preferred shares, that might be a detriment in the eyes of CDFI lenders because it's not an owner investment. So that was something we didn't really think about, but I thought, I wanted to put it out there so that you're aware of it as you're, having your discussions about what's going to be part of your capital stack. And the reality is it can be really hard to raise significant money from owners in lower income communities. So you have to figure out, what you think is realistic in your community. And I'm not sure that if we had known that earlier, if it would have changed what we did, because we had a lot of good reasons for approaching raising the funds the way that we did. But I just think it's important to know that that owner investment is also seen as a valuable when you're talking to CDFI lenders that deal with food cooperatives.
Yeah.
Leslie, you've had similar.
Yeah. I'll jump in. Our capital stack kind of had it all. And initially we had about $1.5 million in owner capital from our owners, and wanted to pursue $1 million in loans after that, in addition to our grants. Our total project was about $5 million. So what we learned in trying to obtain that loan is really your best partners are those who understand what co-ops are, how we work, and also understand grocery business too. Not having that single guarantor, I'm sure if you've talked to any banks, can be really tricky. We also tried credit unions who were structured similar to us. Also tricky because even though they're similar in organization structure, their underwriting policies were still similar in terms of wanting just that single guarantor and not really understanding how this all worked. So we did work with Leaf and shared capital for our loans, and we know a lot of people are working with Leaf and shared capital, which is great. They have been good partners. They do understand co-ops. They do really support what we do. We've gotten a lot of kudos from them as we're trying to raise this last little bit of money, but even with that $1.5 million in owner loans, we still are raising this extra capital here now in as a contingency for our funding on those loans. So they're definitely lenders are definitely looking for that capital contribution from owners. And just thinking about that. And our best experience also too is just overplan the amount of money that you need. Our project is actually almost exactly on budget. We're actually a little under budget when all things are said and done. But it wouldn't hurt to have another $100,000 or $200,000 in the bank in any way, shape, or form. So I think Domenic had mentioned this too. Plan for those increase in expenses and build that into your capital stack as well. Another tip is just we also found some lenders were willing to talk to us and entertain the discussion of, yeah, sure, we could talk to you about a loan. And then once it really gets into underwriting though, and gets to the nitty gritty, then they start really taking a close look at your collateral as well as that owner investment. And that can reduce the amount of funding that they may be willing to offer you. So in our case, again, we thought we had $1 million as an option, and that ended up being different. So we had to pivot, which we all do. We're all really good at pivoting, but just plan. It takes time. It takes extra time to make that pivot. And it's also a tricky message to convey to your owners too. We had to work really carefully with our owners so that they understood this really complicated process, not living it.
Thanks. And Grant, you had a little bit of a different perspective to add too, right?
Right, in terms of what our funding stack looks like and the percentage, let's say, of it that is owner participation. Possibly because of the sort of transient nature of people in an urban environment, we've had trouble raising funds through our owners. We have raised money, a similar amount to Prairie, but by percentage of the cost of the project, it's a lot smaller. So it's a smaller part of our capital stack, owner loans, and we've also got preferred shares out now too. So we've done both of those. They were really challenging. And I think, we watch Prairie and are impressed with their efforts on the fundraising side, and we just struggled. So that means that something like that TIF grant from the city at $5.8 million is existential for us. If you can imagine not having it, we could never raise $5.8 million from owners to replace that. So that's how critical this grant funding is for us, and that's just part of our capital stack. So we'll have a large loan as well. And so, yeah, just saying that for us, it was a game changer, being able to access grant funding, city support any way we can. And I think with the rising cost of projects, and maybe it's the urban thing, this conversation today is, spot on, because I think co-ops need to be chasing grant funding.
So we have a few minutes and I'd love to open it up. I want to just shout out everybody who's been crowdsourcing the more technical questions that have been coming in on the chat. So thank you all for chiming in and answering those quick questions.
There's
Joe,
so many
you
acronyms.
I know so many acronyms.
That we just throw out
Someday-
there like everybody who knows them.
Oh, I know so much. Joe, you had a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question about collateral?
Yeah, sure. I was just mainly curious with SunCoast when she had mentioned the collateral that they were using at the time to help with securing the loan. Just curious what they were looking for collateral.
That might have been Leslie or yeah.
I
So
think
I'll
that
let
was
Leslie
me.
answer, yeah.
Yeah, so mostly because we do not own our building, we are leasing our space. So we do not own our building. So most of our collateral is in the form of our equipment that's in our space.
Oh, Dominic, you just chimed in on the chat affirming that same thing
Yeah,
too, right?
Yeah, it's the same with us. We lease our space. So the only real assets that we have is our equipment. And so they took a lien again. They were like first position against the future purchase of our equipment.
Correct, same here, yeah.
Right. What other questions? Feel free to use the hand raise. And Linda, I see you with a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask that?
Yeah. I've been thinking why, if I've been putting this out there to NCG, the National Co-op Grocers and other people, what have we thought of a national food co-op loan program that we, the food co-ops, especially established food co-ops, instigate and run? So say somebody shops at their store, when they're at their checkout, there could be a way for them to donate 1% of that basket, not off from the co-op itself, but over what they're paying for their food to this revolving loan fund or whatever we want to call it. So we have control over a big kitty of money, because it's clear the federal government is very scary right now. And if that's our major source of funding, I feel like we're screwed.
I really love that idea, Linda. I think that's a great idea. And I think we have to really start getting creative, you know, because things are getting expensive and, you know, we can't necessarily rely on, you know, maybe federal or other pockets of money. And I think, yeah, I think we should be thinking creatively, and I think we should keep pushing, you know, our elected officials and others also to think about ways to fund food co-ops, because, you know, they bring so many benefits to our communities. So yeah, I'm all for that.
I'll start a petition drive.
Yeah.
All right. What other questions do folks have or comments you want to share? Bertha, yeah.
Yes, I just, this was wonderful. Thank you. I took a lot of notes because we are just getting started. We're still in the organizing stage and we are about to start applying for the HFFI grant, which would be our biggest grant so far. We got a small grant from the city of Winchester last year. And so this is going to be our first big grant. So I'd like to hear what your experience with this grant was. What advice can you offer? Is it sort of an easy grant to get? We're just beginning the application.
Anybody have HFFI?
I can share. So we, our first two applications to HFFI didn't get funded. And I think the main reason is because at the time they were looking for like shovel ready projects. So we weren't far enough along for them to give us funding. But the nice thing about HFFI is they have a lot of, they have several different pockets of money available. So they have, you know, money for the shovel ready projects. Then they have the technical assistance. So I think for, you know, early stage startup, that's really a good place to look for funding. And then also they have a loan program as well. So I think it's, oh, and it's always worth applying. You know, it's good experience. You have that template that maybe you could use for other grant applications. And they also in the past were good about giving us feedback too on why we didn't get funded.
That's great. And Leslie chimed in saying that they're also applying. Learn the lesson to not stop asking for more money. Yes, always ask for more money. They can always say no. I do know, just to echo what Kim just said, Bertha, that HFFI does have a number of different grant programs. And so they do have planning grants, and then they have technical assistance grants. So they have grants throughout the process. And in their previous rounds recently, they included a huge number of startups and food co-ops in their list. So they're definitely keyed in to this work and the effort. So wish you the best of luck there. Chrissy, you want to ask your question and then we'll wrap it up from there?
Sure. I'm just wondering, in terms of timeline, were these grants submitted before or after a site had been procured? I know some grants cite critical infrastructure has to be in place, and usually that refers to an actual location. So I was just wondering which grants maybe were submitted before a location been procured, and what ones have been submitted after.
We for our grant, we already had a physical location secured. And part of what made us attractive for the grant is that we are located in a part of the city that's undergoing a neighborhood improvement zone. So we were a cornerstone project for that zone. So having the location and being in that area, I don't know if I'd call it a requirement, but it certainly was a really big advantage.
All right, awesome. I'm going to wrap us up and just share a screen to just express our deep gratitude to our panelists. Thank you all so much for sharing your lessons learned. It's vulnerable to ask people to share what they've learned and what's been easy and what's been challenging. So thank you all very much. In your inbox, you have just received a survey from FCI. It takes like 2 minutes to do. We really ask that you do it. It makes a huge difference in helping to cultivate this lineup for next year and to help us keep our program free to attend. We are in day 2 of a 2-week virtual conference. So just to highlight a couple of upcoming sessions, you can register for as many as you'd like. We encourage you to come to a lot. This afternoon, right after this, there's a session on getting the store open with Chris Dilley, who just joined FCI, and Chris Gilbert, when their lessons from Gem City, and intricacies of multi-stakeholder co-ops with Alana Hines, who I think was in this session. Thank you, Alana, for coming and for speaking. Hope you all are able to participate. And just a big thank you to all of our sponsors. We're really grateful for everyone's support in helping to make this possible. I can stay for a minute, so I'm going to stop recording. And if folks have lingering questions, you're welcome to stay. Thank you very much.
I have a question.